If you're new to Scotch or haven't tried a lot of variety of Scotch, this is the video for you because I have 10 bottles sitting behind me that have a wide variety of expressions and flavors and really great stuff for beginners and people that just like Scotch. So let's do this. Welcome to Whisky Riffs. If you're new here, I'm Kevin. Thank you for stopping by. This episode is one that I've been wanting to make for a long time, and I've been compiling my list of whiskeys because I get asked all the time, what Scotch should I buy? And some of these people are new to Scotch, some have been bourbon drinkers and are trying to get into a different type of whiskey, some have never touched whiskey before in their lives, and they're looking for some suggestions just to get started. Well, this is the episode for them, for you. Hopefully you'll learn something from this. Even if you're an experienced whiskey drinker, you might enjoy my suggestions for which whiskeys are affordable and tasty. I happen to like a lot of these whiskeys and buy them all the time. They're not just for beginners. Now I'm going to be focusing on certain kinds of Scotch in this episode, basically a single malt Scotch and a blended malt Scotch, and then wine cask finished Scotch. Now a single malt Scotch is made from 100% barley, and it's made at one distillery, which is the single in the name. Malt means barley, so single malt means 100% barley, one distillery, and I've got some of those behind me right now. I also have some blended malt Scotches, which means that it's single malt Scotches from different distilleries, and they blend them together. If you see a blended Scotch, that means you could have other grains in there, and it may not be made with a pot still, it could be a column still. And I'm not including those. I do have a lovely episode about Johnny Walker, 5 different expressions from them. You can check that out. I'll put some links down below. It's great if that's what you're looking for, but right now I'm focusing on single malt because I think barley gives some amazing flavors to whiskey, and I really want to focus on those today. So let's get started with the blended malt Scotch. The nice thing about blended malt Scotches, they have to be aged at least 5 years, so you know the Scotch in these bottles that I have in front of me are at least 5 years old. They are no age statement whiskeys though, which means there's no defined time in a cask. They could have some older whiskeys and some younger whiskeys, but they're non-age statement. Now, the first one here is Monkey Shoulder, which is a great expression to get started with whiskey. It is at 43% ABV, and it is a blended malt Scotch. It has a great price point, about $25, which means you're not breaking the bank to try your first bottle of Scotch. And I also think that it's an amazing flavor of Scotch, even though it's at such a low price point. And their website is going to push it as a Scotch for mixed drinks. And it is a great Scotch for mixed drinks because you're not spending a lot of money and then diluting it with Coke or Sprite or something else. This is a wonderful entry-level Scotch for most people. The flavor profile is pretty common for malted Scotch. You've got those malty flavors, you've got a little bit of the wood notes, you've got some spiciness but not too much, and the ABV being a little lower helps keep that spiciness out of your mouth. Now you may think, Monkey Shoulder, what a strange name for a whiskey. It actually comes from the malting process. When you take barley and you want to sweeten it up, you moisten it, you put it out on a floor, and they used to do this all the time manually. Now they do it more automated. But a guy would come around with a big heavy shovel and he'd scoop into the barley, flip it over, keep turning this barley so you didn't end up with moist spots and it getting spoiled. But they want that barley to get just a little bit sweeter by it starting to get near that I want to grow stage. And then they apply heat to it and stop that process. The process of scooping that and flipping it over, though, with those heavy shovels in the olden days was an RSI injury. So repetitive strain, you kind of had this arm hanging down, this shoulder up in the air, Monkey Shoulder. The next blended malt Scotch I have is Spice Tree by Compass Box. They do a really great job of making really high quality blended Scotches. They take a lot of care in what they do, and it's a little more expensive than the Monkey Shoulder. This is $60 around me, but it also is non-chill filtered, it's natural color, and you're getting just a bit higher ABV at 46%. Now, it's not that important to have chill filtering and natural color in whiskeys. It's not going to affect the flavor that much, but if you can get a brand that does that and has at least 46% ABV, you're getting just a little bit more quality, maybe a little bit more flavor profile from a whiskey. And Compass Box is a really great choice if you're into whiskey and haven't tried it yet. you really need to check them out. Yeah, it's a little bit spicier. So if you're brand new to Scotch and you're not used to that wood spice, this may be a little bit too intense for you. So start out with the monkey shoulder and get yourself into Scotch first, and then try this Compass box. Great whiskeys. In fact, if you like smoky whiskeys, their Peat Monster is a great choice. Next up are the single malt Scotches. Now these aren't blends at all. They're from one distillery, single malt, and the ones I've chosen are really easy to get into, especially at the low ABV levels. Normally when I'm picking a whiskey out, I like at least 46% ABV, but that doesn't mean whiskeys are bad at lower ABV. It just means that it's a different flavor. So the first one is the Glenlivet 12, which is a really nice entry-level whiskey. It's 40% ABV, and it's only $29, which is really hard to beat for a single malt Scotch. The really nice part about this is, at that price point, it's also widely available. So Glenlivet has great distribution. You should be able to find it in almost any liquor store or even most bars. But because it's at 40% ABV, it's going to be chill filtered, and it also has probably got some coloring added to it. It's a mass market type product, but it is aged in two cask types, American oak and European oak, which gives it some exceptional flavors. Next up is the Glenmorangie 10, the original. Now this is a little bit higher ABV at 43%, and it also has a very light flavor to it. Glenmorangie uses very tall stills, giraffe neck stills, so it kind of lightens up the flavors. It gives you those higher notes, those apple and pear, and really lovely, delicate notes to a whiskey. Price isn't much different from the Glenlivet, which is only about $30 around me, so in that same low-end price point, certainly not going to hurt you to get a bottle of this and give it a try. Now with Glenmorangie 10, you're only getting 10 years of aging in a cask, but that's pretty good. That's a nice base point for getting some time in a cask and giving some flavors from those ex-bourbon casks. And I love the general flavor notes from this. Even the nose is very pretty. No complaints at all about the Glenmorangie 10. I highly recommend it, especially at that price point. It's a great, soft, entry-level whiskey. You're not going to get a lot of oak spice, and those giraffe necks really do a great job of keeping things smooth and clean in this whiskey. Next up on the single malt list is the Arran 10. As the name states, it's a 10-year-old whiskey aged in bourbon casks, and it is very nice because it's non-chill filtered and natural color. The problem is it's a little higher priced. I found this one for about $75 in my area. It's not as widely distributed as the Glenmorangie or the Glenlivet, so you may have a hard time finding this, but if you tried other whiskeys and you're looking for something a little bit different that's really high quality, I recommend the Arran 10. It's a great distillery, very trusted distillery, and I like what they do with their different expressions. Now, it's very common to age Scotch in ex-bourbon casks. The reason is bourbon requires new oak casks. That means after they use a cask once to make bourbon, they can't use it again, or else they can't call it bourbon. So why not reuse the casks? And Scotland was very smart and said, hey, America, we'll take those ex-bourbon casks and we'll make some Scotch with them, because the flavor profile of bourbon is very nice and you get some great flavors from those casks. It's very common to find Scotch that has also been matured in other casks after or instead of ex-bourbon casks, and these are often ex-wine casks. And what that does is it imparts the flavors of different types of wines into the whiskeys. A very common type is a sherry cask. Now, sherry is a fortified wine from Spain, and you'll see a lot of whiskeys, especially Scotch whiskeys, that use sherry casks as their finishing or part of their aging process. Some do all their aging in a sherry cask, some do just part of it and maybe use ex-bourbon or European oak casks as the other part of it. And I've got a few of my favorites sitting behind me. Let me grab them and introduce you to them. Because a distillery has to pay a little bit more for ex-wine casks, and they're a little more rare than an ex-bourbon cask, the prices for the whiskeys that have a finishing or a aging in these casks can be a little bit more expensive. So you may be paying more than $50, more than $60, and upwards from there. The first one I have is the Balvenie. Now this is at 43% ABV. It's 12 years old, and it's got a rather intense aging process. The 12 years is in ex-bourbon casks, and then they add time in other casks. At least 9 months for Oloroso sherry casks. Then they take all the casks of aged whiskey that's been in ex-bourbon casks and in Oloroso sherry casks, and they put it in a massive thing called a tun, and they let it blend and mix together all the different casks to give you a nice consistent flavor, and that happens for 3 to 4 months usually. Now Balvenie's been doing this for over 30 years, and they have their system down pat. Now I think the Balvenie is a little bit sharper and a little bit spicier than some of the other finished whiskeys, but I still think it's a great whiskey, and if you can get your hands on it or try it maybe at a bar, go ahead and do it because it's a wonderful entry point for sherry whiskeys. Next up, a distillery that's a favorite of mine, the Bunnahabhain 12. This is a very nice whiskey from Islay. And if you've heard of Islay, you might think that all whiskeys from Islay are smoky. This is not a smoky peated whiskey, and a lot of their core expressions are not smoky and peated. That's why this can be a great whiskey for someone who's just getting into Scotch. They bottle at 46.3% ABV, which means they don't need to chill filter it. They also make sure they're natural colored, and they price this around $60 in the San Francisco area. The Bunnahabhain 12 has spent time in ex-bourbon casks and sherry casks, and has a really lovely balanced flavor, and I trust this distillery. Even though it's not smoky or peated, you are going to get some of those Islay flavors, which are the briny notes and kind of that damper, mossier note in my tastings. So it's got some different flavor points to it, but if you like those kind of notes, Bunnahabhain is a great distillery, lots of great expressions, definitely a place that I would check out once you're into Scotch. This may not be your first one, but I think you should work your way up to it. Next up on the list is another favorite distillery of mine. This single malt comes from Aberlour, and it's the Aberlour 12, aged 12 years. ABV is a little bit low at 40%, but I don't mind because they pack a lot of flavor into their whiskeys, and my favorite Aberlour expression is the Abuna. It's not for the timid, it's closer to 60% ABV. This one down at 40% is much easier on your palate, which is why I picked it out. I think you can learn a lot about what a sherry whiskey is from going to Aberlour, and if you're into this, if this tastes good to you, maybe you can try their sherry bomb, which is the Abuna. And if you do, let me know in the comments because I want to hear if you like it or not. It is one of my favorite sherry bomb whiskeys. The final finished single malt whiskey on my list is Glenmorangie 14, the Quinta Ruban. This is one of my favorites. I've bought this so many times. I love this whiskey. 14 years aging in both ex-bourbon and port casks. Now, like sherry, port is a fortified wine, but it's from Portugal, and it has a little bit different flavor than sherry. I think it's a little more intense. So where sherry can be sweeter, I think port gives you a little more bang in the taste profile. But I really like that little bit of extra spiciness when I'm drinking a whiskey, and this is a great expression of a port whiskey. At 46%, this whiskey is non-chill filtered, which is great, and the price point isn't bad either. I got this one for about $57 in San Francisco. And if anybody has any price points for any of these expressions, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. It really helps if the community shares what the prices are in their different areas because they vary greatly. Whiskey prices may vary from store to store, and they certainly vary from area to area because it's all about the distribution. I'm definitely going to pour a little bit of this one because I love it very much, and I'm not going to miss out on taking a sip on camera. You can even see the colors. It's a little different from sherry. For me, it's got a bit of a darker color. Now, this may have a little bit of caramel coloring in it. It's debated out there in the whiskey world which Glenmorangie expressions have coloring or not. You can leave that in the comments too and educate all of us on what you found out. Now, what you get with the Quinta Ruban as far as notes are like mandarin oranges, pepper, spiciness from the oak. You get some black currants, and I also get some dark chocolate when I'm tasting it. But I bought a lot of bottles of the Quinta Ruban over the years, and I think it's just a wonderful expression. If you're new to whiskey, you could probably deal with this one. It's a little bit spicier, but that port finish does give you some sweetness, some fruitiness that may take away from the spice and give you just what you want in that long finish. Just really warms the body. So what are my recommendations if you're brand new to Scotch? Well, you can't beat Monkey Shoulder. I mean, this one is just so well priced and so easy to drink. I think it's great. And if you decide, I don't want to drink a neat whiskey, I want to mix some drinks with whiskey, then Monkey Shoulder is an excellent option because you're not wasting a lot of money to get the wonderful flavors of a Scotch. If you're looking to try a single malt Scotch as your entry to Scotch, then I recommend the Glenmorangie 10. The Glenlivet is great, but Glenmorangie gives it just a few more sweet flavors. I think the draft neck stills are the key there, and it is an excellent option for someone new to whiskey. Again, price is good and it's easy to get, so either of these two are wonderful for someone who's just getting into whiskey. As far as flavored whiskey goes, I recommend these two. The Glenfarclas 12 is at a great price point. It's a wonderful sherried whiskey, gives you all those lovely flavors, and it's a brand you can trust for all their different expressions. Again, the Glenmorangie comes in as my favorite hero. I love the port finish on it. I love those flavor profiles. If you can try it in a sample pack, they have those for Glenmorangie. You can get a lot of them in there. I think the 10's in there, at least the Quinta Ruban, and probably a couple of their other expressions. Those are cheap ways of getting into whiskey and trying them out. So those are my recommendations on Scotch whiskey for beginners and for someone who just enjoys Scotch whiskey. Even though I love all these whiskeys, I'm going to sign off with the Quinta Ruban because it's just an old friend of mine. Let me know in the comments what you think of my list. If you've got alternates, if you think there's a whiskey that someone should try as their first Scotch whiskey, I'd love to hear about it. And let me know why. You know, there are reasons why I picked these. They're old friends, they're old favorites, and they're ones that I trust to be drank as a first entry-level Scotch. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and go ahead and share it with friends. I love getting more people in the Whisky Riffs community. And until the next episode, take care of yourself. Take care of those people around you.